Welcome everyone to our January EL check-in. This month, we're going to be talking about grading and retention. So I hope you're all staying warm in our snowy weather. I know a lot of schools are out today, and there was a little bit of confusion on our hub showing it was the 27th, but it's actually on Monday, the 26th. So here we are. So if you're unable to watch it live, you'll see the recording. And welcome to you then. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Whoops, maybe. There we go. All right. So move this a little bit. There we go. Again, welcome to our January meeting. Today we're again talking about grading and retention. As always, we have our community agreements. Just trusting our good intentions, staying engaged, speaking our truth, knowing that we may not always come to closure or agree on everything, but you're welcome to voice your opinions and bring your identity to the conversation. I like the quote that I found for this month: never be so focused on what you're looking for that you overlook the things you actually find. That's by Ann Patchett, who is an author. So I thought that was a really good quote for this month. Today's topic kind of covers all of our English learner steps, our blueprint steps. So especially our graduating and college and career ready and ready to contribute to civic life and community, because we're preparing our students for graduation, hopefully leading them through their coursework to get them to where they want to be. That's kind of our focus. As far as announcements, I'm going to kind of leave those to our EL listserv, since we have that coming out monthly. If you are not already on the EL listserv, it's been changed a little bit now that we have our base population populated that it goes out to. They've switched it where it's no longer populated through core data, and now it is a subscription or unsubscribe link. So this link that's on the screen will take you to where you can sign up if you're not already signed up. And every month, 2 times a month is what we're trying for. I will be posting those WIDA notices and any EL information that comes between our check-ins that's necessary. And this is pretty much the only information regarding our things going on in our state that I wanted to share this month. Is that listserv is available. Other than that, we're all testing right now. Hopefully you're getting your testing taken care of and are nearing the end. We have until almost the end of February to get that done. Myself and our male staff are out doing some quality assurance visits, so we'll see some of you as you're administering those assessments. And for the rest of you, hopefully it's going well. If you have problems, make sure you reach out to one of us and we're happy to help. All right, as I said, we're going to be talking about grading and retention, and the link to the note taker is there as well. And I will put a summary of today's meeting in the note taker when we conclude today. Just making sure that, yeah, I am recording. All right, so we're going to be talking about grading. There have been a lot of the documents that we relied upon for the requirements and regulations that have since been rescinded. But those documents were based on law, mainly the Lau versus Nichols law case and the 1983 Office of Civil Rights document of 1964 that was updated in 1983. So what they actually point out are these key requirements and for grading and assessing English learners. The first one is that it's non-discriminatory. Grades have to be based on how much the student understands the subject matter, not their proficiency in English. So we're looking at, are they learning the curriculum? Are they engaging in the coursework? Are they actually learning what we're setting out for them to do? So that's what we're looking at first. And then, are we using the required accommodations? Teachers have to accommodate the instruction and assessment. And if we're failing them without providing those accommodations, then we're going against the requirements of the law. So we can't fail them unless we are providing those accommodations, and they're not doing well with those accommodations in place. Along with that, the students are required to have individualized plans that document the modifications and their progress towards goals. We don't provide students with an automatic failing grade. Again, if they're not getting accommodations and we're not meeting their needs, we can't give them an F if they're not being successful without those accommodations in place. And progress monitoring, districts have to monitor the progress of their program and whether or not their students within that program are making progress towards proficiency. And the last one, there is a law in place that says we do not retain students based on language barriers. So we can't retain them in kindergarten until they learn English. We have to advance them as age appropriate. So we don't keep them back a grade just because they haven't acquired English yet. These requirements are or have been enforced by the Department of Justice and Office of EOC. Okay. What we want to emphasize is that no English learner is just given a grade. Our English learners earn their grades. So we want to make sure that we're providing instruction that allows them to learn the content as we go along and as they're learning language. One thing I hear quite a bit is that when we accommodate and when we do these extra things for our English learners, it's unfair. They're getting an unfair advantage. This is really not the case. What we're doing is leveling the playing field. And I liken that to our special needs students. If we have a student who is deaf, we provide them with tools to help them understand the content, whether it's sign language or written text or other ways that we accommodate for them. And if they're successful, we would give them grades that show their progress and how much they're able to learn. It's the same concept that we use with our English learners. We're providing them with tools to enable them to keep up and learn the content as it's presented to them. And just because a student is getting A's with their scaffolded assignments with those accommodations doesn't mean that they shouldn't get an A in the grade book. We give them the grade based on their ability to show us mastery of the skills. And so when we're looking at grades, we have to kind of ask ourselves, just really, what are grades? They, as this says, they're a shorthand for reports on what you can do at the end of your learning journey. They're not the path that you took to get there. So we can't really say an A is this. We're talking about different ways of computing the A, but an A isn't really telling us what this student has learned in that pathway. We give grades to provide feedback on what they can show us they've learned, to document their progress towards a goal, to guide our instructional decisions on whether we need to change the way we're approaching teaching that concept, whether or not the students are understanding, have that comprehensible input and output. We don't use grades for motivating our students to do better. We certainly don't use them to punish students for not doing well. We still sometimes use it for sorting students into groups, but that is not the intent of grading. What we're really wanting to do is find out how the students are doing in their progression to learning the content. So here's some shoulds. Students should receive grades based on what they can do with proper scaffolds in place. So they don't get a D or F based on their lack of proficiency, as we said. D's and F's are only if they're not successful after we've modified the instruction or modified the assignments. And if at that point they're not making satisfactory progress with that modified work, then yes, they could earn a D or an F. Okay? English learners should receive a report card that's based on their work, and that work is accommodated as necessary. Classroom teachers should accommodate and modify instruction, assignment, and tests. So you should test the same way you're teaching based on their English language proficiency. And the use of instructional accommodations does not indicate that they cannot receive the highest points possible. So if they can do it with accommodations and show they have mastery, we give them the grade that demonstrates they have mastery. If they need accommodations, they should be provided for every assessment that we give them. So if we're giving it on one assessment, they should get it on all other assessments in all other content areas. So anytime we're teaching a certain way, again, we should test that way, and we should test that way in every class that it's needed. And that should be something that's included in their IAP, ILP, whichever you call it in your district. So we identify what accommodations should be in place for the students on any assessment that they take. And then the last point here, it needs to be an open channel of communication between the ELT teacher and the content area teacher, so they know what expectations are needed and what accommodations are needed for the English learner in their classroom. Some things, principles and tenets to keep in mind when we're grading our students is that teachers have to be ethical. So the reason I say that is we don't say, oh, the student did great on this. I think I'm going to go ahead and give them an A. I think they're showing that they understand, so I'm just going to give them an A. We have to have evidence that shows that they're achieving mastery. So we have to either do formative assessments or have evidence of writing or recordings, something that shows us that the student is actually understanding what we're teaching. So we're gathering that evidence. We're building that portfolio for the student that shows that they're understanding the things that we're teaching them. And when we give them grades on a report card, we are publicly declaring that this student has met the goals that we set for them. We can't report anything that we can't demonstrate how we got that grade. So if it's an irregularity in the standards, unless we're reporting that and recording that somewhere, we can't use that to give them a grade. So any test format that doesn't create an accurate report of the students achieving the standards is going to have to be changed if we're going to report that on their grade card. All right. So every classroom teacher, it's not just a district plan, it goes down to the classroom level. Every teacher's evaluation process should reflect the student's individual progress. It should relate to the body of knowledge or the skill taught, and it should include several indicators of their progress, not just one or two, but it should be an ongoing accumulation of everything they're doing that shows us they have learned that skill. All right. Again, why do we grade? They're a valid and undiluted indicator of what the student knows. We're looking for mastery. And we're providing feedback to the students and their parents on what they're learning, whether they're learning. It also informs us on instructional decisions, whether we need to reteach something, whether none of our students understood what we were presenting at that time. And maybe we need to look at that standard and make sure that we understand it better so we can present it to them again. Okay. Now, a lot of our school districts are moving towards a more standards-based assessment and grading. So we need to understand what that is. One thing about standards-based assessment is you only give grades for what's in the standards, nothing else. So if it's listed in your course curriculum, if it's one of our standards that we're going to be covering, we can give a grade for that. But if it's not part of that, it shouldn't be reported on our grade card. It could be maybe in a separate column where we said, in addition, we covered these, but these are not incorporated into the student's overall grade. So we can give them credit for that, but it shouldn't be part of our grading process. If you're standards-based, you're only grading on the required standards, nothing else. And then, oops, there we go. Sometimes that requires us to remove or change some of our grading practices in order to continue with the integrity of our grading system. Because again, if it's standards-based, it has to be based on the standards. Another thing we want to make sure that we keep in our mind is that when we're talking about second language learning, it's not a disability. Our students don't have something wrong that needs fixed. It's a temporary situation until they learn English. And they need time to develop their English language skills to be fully competent in tasks that are presented to them in an English-only classroom, without accommodations, without those extra things. And what we do as teachers while this is going on has a big impact on how well they do in class and how well they're motivated and how successful they are. So we have to keep that in mind as well. Another thing we always that I bring up frequently is comprehensible input that brings comprehensible output. And that is what we call comprehensible instruction, making sure that we're presenting things in a way that our English learners have that level of understanding that allows them to be successful. So they need support with grade level instruction in order to reach that level of understanding. And sometimes we need to remember that when we're working with English learners, it's hard for them. All day long, they're listening in a language that is not their first language. We've heard them say that this is double duty, as it says here. They're learning English while we're learning content. And we want to make sure we keep that going, because if we're not doing both at the same time, we're going to widen that academic gap that sometimes we find, especially with our long-term English learners. And often those long-term English language learners didn't receive both in tandem. And so they're having to play catch up with the things they didn't acquire while they were learning language. So we have to make sure as we lecture, as we give content, as we ask students questions about their learning, that we're doing this through the different filters of a language learner. We have to have clear expectations so that they know exactly what we want them to produce, so that they know exactly what we want them to do and how we're going to do it. We have to provide those supports so that they can get there based on their language proficiency levels. And we have to also take into account some social, emotional context that might not be present with some of our other students. Maybe they had trauma and how they got here. Maybe, even though this happens with some of our English-only students as well, maybe they're having to work to help support their families. We see it a lot with our English language learners that they're working nights to help put food on the table for their family, or they're babysitting the brothers and sisters at home while their parents are working all night. So we have to take those things into consideration as well when we're looking at students and making some accommodations and giving some empathy to them. Um, we also have to think about our teachers because sometimes our classroom teachers, when we are EL teachers working with them, they don't have the training and they don't have the information that they need to work with English learners and provide the scaffolded and the accommodated instruction. So we have to work with them so they understand how to accommodate and how to work with those standards. And sometimes they don't see the big picture of the standards. They only see the ones that they work with. So they need some help understanding how they all work together. And I like to say with our EL teachers, we are in everybody's business because we have to know the language of math, science, social studies, ELA, and social emotional. We're in all of that. And so we approach all of those through our standards. The next screen, I have a little video that I found that I wanted to share with you. It kind of talks to how teachers need our collaboration because most of our teachers have not been trained in how to instruct English learners, as I said, and learning a skill for English learners is kind of, we can liken that to learning the skill of how to work with English learners as teachers. So we need to keep both of them in mind, and it takes resilience from both parties. So let me share this video. So did it pop up for you?
That's a good question. What does resilience feel like? I think the word resilience has a positive connotation, but when you're being resilient, it definitely does not feel positive. I think that's so beautiful. Being resilient doesn't feel resilient at all. It feels so messy. Another way of thinking about it is we also have not knowing and knowing. The space between not knowing something and knowing something is really painful, especially if you fashioned yourself to be someone who's academically talented, because then it almost feels like your academic success or your identity as a smart person is tied to knowing. When you're in the space of that, it's really easy to want to exit something. So this has a name in my mind, right? It's called the learning space. This is actually what learning, no matter what you're learning, something on the job, something from puzzles, learning to read, you don't know how to do it, you want to know how to do it. And what I think is really empowering to know is the learning space has one feeling associated with it: frustration. That's literally how learning feels. And if you think about that, then frustration becomes this actually like almost amazing thing you can learn to love, even though it's painful, because you're like, this is actually a sign that I'm learning. Whenever you're frustrated, it literally means you're somewhere in the learning space. And why frustration tolerance is so important is because people think that resilience and success comes from getting to knowing as soon as possible. They're wrong. Resilience and success comes from the length of time you can just tolerate being in this space. So the longer you can tolerate being here, the more you will ride this, and the more you'll eventually come here.
So I thought that was kind of a good message for our teachers. It isn't just a quick from not knowing to knowing. It's that building that productive struggle. So our students need that productive struggle. That solidifies the learning. That makes it more, it gives them more ownership of what they're learning because they had to work to get there. So it doesn't come easy. Even for our teachers, learning how to work with the students is also a productive struggle. And the more frustration we have with it just means that it is a productive struggle. We're learning something, we're working on it. So we can't discount that it is a struggle and it will take time, but we will get there. So I thought that was a really good video to share with you. Kind of talks to that. So there is another strategy that I wanted to share that's called the MAP strategy, not to be confused with our state assessment, but MAP in this case means that we meet with teachers, we meet with others to talk about our English learners. We have accountability and accommodations, there's our A. And the P is we're proactively planning, whether it's for next year, next semester, the next unit of study, whatever. We have a plan in progress that we're working on. We're going to talk a little bit more of that in depth. So first of all, you meet with your teachers. Your district, your school has to have a plan in place on how you use your language survey. Who's going to notify the classroom teacher of where the students are? Who's going to notify your EL teacher that we have this student that has answered these questions on the language survey? What process are you using to notify those people who need to know? And then the general education and EL teacher team, are they meeting together to discuss the students as well? There are some questions that help with that support. So if you're meeting with your content teacher and you're an EL teacher, you can ask, what's one thing that I do to make you feel supported when I'm working with you and talking about our students? Or what's one thing that I can do to support you more? Do you provide office hours and hopefully with snacks or something to entice them to be there? In the classroom, do you get with them and say, okay, who have I not worked with that I need to? Who needs, and then when you're working with your teacher, what teacher might need a visit just to talk about other things not related to English learners, where you're not talking shop, as it says there, because we found that teachers really don't trust us and value us until they get to know us. So we have to build relationships as well as building their confidence that we can help them with our English learners. And then when you're talking to your content teachers, ask them, who should I add to my watch list? What students should I be looking at more closely? That validates them and invites them to give you input on what they're seeing in the classroom. Because I don't know how many times I've not heard from classroom teachers, and then they come to me and tell me later that there's a problem. But if I'm proactive and ask them, hey, is there someone I should be looking at? Is there something going on that I should know about? That eliminates them have to always come to me when there's a problem. And then invite them to come see the English learners in your classroom. So if you're the EL teacher, invite them to come into your classroom and see what's going on there. It's also a safe place. So we talk about a lot of times the EL classroom. The reason many teachers like to pull kids from the classroom to their EL classroom is it's a place where the student feels safe. They're able to talk to amongst peers and they don't feel intimidated. That same safe space, we can invite classroom teachers, content teachers in to visit with the students in there, and maybe they'll feel a little more comfortable talking to the teacher in that area, in that location. So keep that in mind as well. So here's some positive things for coaching. You can ask when in that conversation with the teacher, what part of this lesson do you think the student understands well, and where might language get in the way? So you can have this conversation looking at what they're going to teach and asking, where do you think language is going to get in the way with this? And then work together to break down some of those barriers. Or how could the student interact with content during this lesson? Have you given them opportunities to talk about it, write about it, or show you what they're thinking? What supports have worked well for them in the past, and how can we incorporate those into this new lesson? How are the directions and the key ideas presented? Are there other ways where the student can hear it, see it, and process it? And then the fifth one here, if we wanted the student to participate more confidently, what's one small adjustment we could try to get together next time to get them there? So make it a group effort, but give them those ins. Ask those questions to get them involved. That's part of that formative assessment that we can do in class that we're doing along with this other teacher. Another meat that goes with the M part is, have you invited content teachers, as I said, to visit your Yale classroom? Have you asked and invited those teachers to attend meetings, team meetings for your EL teachers, or conferences that you attend as EL teachers, or events that you hold for the parents, luncheons that you might have, grade level activities or trips that you take with your English learners? anything you're doing with ELs and their families, have you invited classroom teachers to those so that they see that and they're involved? And then providing PD for your for your classroom teachers. That's something that's required through the ESSA plan that we provide professional development on how to work with English language learners. And I found that many schools don't do that, but that is a requirement. You could also provide some office hours, either in person or through a virtual platform or something. It could be weekly, monthly, but you need to be in contact with those teachers. And it could be on a rotating basis with certain teachers at certain months or something like that. But make yourself seen and be part of that, because our students will perform better when we help our teachers understand this better as well. That brings us to accountability and accommodations. So when we're talking with the teachers, make sure we're keeping them up to date on the proficiency level, and make sure our records that we provide to classroom teachers have updated proficiency levels for their students, and that the teachers understand what those proficiency levels mean. Provide an accommodations menu. Here's some things you can try for students at this level to accommodate their proficiency level. We also need to check with the classroom teachers on how the students' grades are, either quarterly, depending on what they're working on. If it's a skill they're struggling, we might want weekly check-ins to see how they're doing and if it's something we need to work on. And then talk to them about the integrated language support, which is what we could call push in to the classroom, or targeted language workshops, which could be when we pull the students for pull out classrooms. So talk about how those classes work and what we could do better to support them in those ways, which leads to our productive planning, our P in the map. So when you get to the end of the year, the end of a quarter, the end of a semester, look at how you're grouping your students. Does that need to change? Do you need to adjust it by grouping the students by proficiency or by grade levels? Do you need to set up some sort of summer screening and building tours for maybe if they're transitioning to a new building? You need to be part of the planning meetings for those students. Um, you should have some EL embedded supports in the content area curriculum, a native speaker in the class, some non-traditional student planning. So maybe high school students are coming down and helping elementary students. Some camps, events, things you could do in the summer or after school hours that help your students. Again, you can invite high school students to take on some leadership opportunities, have a time at the library where they can read with other students or something like that. Or take them on college and career site visits when they're getting to be older. Go along with them on those visits. Again, those are things that help us. They're not really direct assessment, but they're tied to getting our students where they need to be. We all know that our English learners are not always the same. They come with different stages of language acquisition when they enter our schools. They're not always equally able to manage everything that's going on in their grade level. We have to give them scaffolding. We have to know the individual needs of each student. That's where that IAP, ILP comes in. We have to set goals individually and work towards them, because our students have the right to receive grades that represent what they're able to do. Okay? So again, we're going to look back. What are grades? They're not a compensation. They are a communication of what the student is learning and doing. And I put this at the bottom, much like special education, our EL progress is based on meeting goals. So we're setting a goal for the student and we're trying to meet it. We don't necessarily give letter grades or the kind of grades that they give in a classroom in an EL classroom. And also when we're looking at grades, we don't compute them the same. And that's where the next slide is going to come in. A lot of times in classrooms, we average grades. I like to show this example because each one of these students has a 70% in the classroom. So student A is kind of that mythological student who gets the same 70% on everything they do. So they would have an average of 70. Student B, if we're looking at this, and this, I guess, is an ELA classroom. On nonfiction, they scored really low. I'm sorry, on fiction, they scored really low. On nonfiction, they scored really high. Writing is somewhere in the middle. Speaking is not so pretty good, and listening is really good. But even though they had 50, 90, 60, 80, and 70, that averages to 70%. The next one did really good, but they had 1 0, and that brought them down to 70%. And the last one did really good in one area, mediocre in the others, and fair in another one. And that is again 70%. So we have to keep that in mind when we're just giving the student a grade based on an average. We don't normally average whether they're understanding what we're presenting to them. That's a society's definition of gaining proficiency is averaging over time. It tells us how they're doing in relation to others, but we're using criterion reference standards in the classroom. And criterion reference are based on measuring the student's level of performance against themselves, whether they've made progress over time. Averaging was just invented to get rid of influences from one sample error in an experimental design. It's not a measure of how students are doing in relation to a learning goal. So we have to keep that in mind. Something else we want to keep in mind is when we're looking at how our students are doing, and we have to understand that the students in our time period right now have been playing video games and been doing things that give them this immediate feedback. If they're playing a video game and they're not successful, they die. They're gone. They have to start over. And so for them, they need that immediate feedback. They need to understand where they are and how they can improve on an ongoing basis. So that's something else to keep in mind when we're assessing them. They crave that immediate feedback. They want to know how they're doing. They want to know what they can do to win the next time. So research has shown that giving formative feedback is much more effective than giving a grade. So making sure that they understand how they can use their learning to improve over time. Okay. So feedback that we give to the student either in writing or on their report card, that should be something that we can share with parents in a language that they understand as well. So you need to know your parents and whether or not they're literate in their home language on how you send things home. Maybe they need to hear it if they cannot read in their home language. They might need an interpreter, or they might need a phone call rather than something written. So all of those things are important also when we give parents feedback. These are some teacher actions and results from Marzano had a research study that he put together back in 2006, but it's still in effect and still I think is relevant for us today. So they found that if the teacher just tells the student, hey, you got 9 out of 10 correct, good job, that has a negative influence on their achievement. If you tell them, hey, you only got 4 out of 10, you need to do better next time, that has a negative influence on achievement. It doesn't encourage them. It doesn't show them what they need to do to improve. If we clarify the scoring criteria, we give them a rubric, and maybe we look at the rubric and say, you scored here, here's what you could have done, or here's what the rubric looks like, and this is what their expectation was. That increases the student's achievement by 16% or 16 points. If we explain it to them and why their responses are correct or incorrect using that rubric or review of the test, that increases by 20 percentile points. Asking the student to continue responding. So you show them what they did. This is what the scale looks like. This is where you didn't quite meet it. What do you think we can do to improve that? Asking them those questions and getting them involved with how do we solve this? What could we do next time? That increased by the scores by 20 percentile points. And then setting goals and having the students chart their goals increased their percentile points by 26. So this was a study that they did over time in many situations, and they came out with these same results throughout the study. So that tells us we need to involve the students in their learning. We need to go beyond just here's your score. We need to talk about them. We need to look at the problems that they missed and get them involved. And that's what increases their scores, which leads to the next part. We need to provide multiple opportunities. So our assessments and our evaluation of students shouldn't be just a one and done. We need to have ongoing formative assessments, that classwork, those weekly quizzes, projects that we're working on, as well as the summative end of unit and major test. We have to, again, think back. Why are we grading and what are we grading? So we grade students based on their outcomes, not the route that it takes to get there. So given this idea, we have to be careful when we're looking at their grades. We're not giving grades for maintaining a neat notebook. That's not telling us whether they're understanding the concepts. We're not giving grades for a group discussion because that's not just that one student, or class participation, or homework, or work that we do in class, or log minutes of reading, or coming to band practice, or dressing out in PE. Those are all good things and those are expectations, but that's not part of showing us that they understand the concepts we're teaching them. So it has to be something that we can document and record, not bringing in a can of food to give you 10 more points on your grade card, because those don't show us that the student's gaining proficiency in the content we're teaching them. So when we're looking at our classroom everyday things, we want to look at, here's what we're doing, here's the data, here's the facts. So with that data, this is what we're going to do. This is what it tells us we need. This is what we need to work on. And here's our plan of action of getting us there. So that's that. Here's what, so what, now what, which I like to use a lot in my classroom. If we don't allow students to look at what we've taught them, if they've not done well, and redo it, we're telling them this assignment really had no educational value. It wasn't important. It's okay if you don't do this work. Yeah, you didn't do well. Better luck next time. Or we're telling them it's okay if you didn't learn this. It's not important. And none of those are acceptable if we have a highly accomplished professional educator in the classroom who wants their students to learn. If we don't allow them to redo the work, we're denying them learning the information and something that's a vital part of setting a growth mindset and being a mature learner. So here's some 10 practices that help us not dilute a grade's validity and effectiveness. Number one, we don't penalize students' multiple attempts at mastery. We give them additional chances to show us that they understand. Go back over it, resubmit it. We, looking at everyday homework, excuse me, as students become to know the concepts, excuse me, we're giving them feedback, not necessarily a grade on everyday work, but we're giving feedback and telling them this is what you need, this is where you're falling short, here's what you can do to get better. We don't withhold assistance. We give them that scaffolding and that differentiation that they might need to learn. We avoid giving group grades because we all know that when we do that, there's one or two that do a lot of the work, and sometimes there's some that don't do any work, but we've given a grade to everyone for the same outcome. So the grades need to be based on individual abilities, not what the group did as a whole. Incorporating those non-academic factors like behavior, attendance, bringing in a canned food, those should not be part of our grading process. Assessing in ways that don't accurately indicate the student's mastery, those should be avoided. Grading on the curve is also not beneficial if we're wanting to know if they understand. So this person got the A, everybody's grade's going to be adjusted based on that person. That doesn't tell us what that one student is doing to achieve mastery. Extra credit is also one of those things. Yeah, sometimes it does help, but I don't know that it's always beneficial for our grading system to allow extra credit. Depends on the purpose of it and how we're using it. Defining criterion based on, hey, they're above average or average is also not um, helpful with the grade's validity and effectiveness. So we don't say they're above average because we're not looking at the average of the class. We're looking at how that student is doing in their own learning journey. And also putting zeros in the grade book. This video that's linked here gives you a really good picture of what putting a zero in the grade book does. And so we try to avoid that at all costs because it can take a student who had an A all the way down to a D if you have just a couple of zeros in your grade book, which is not a good indicator of what that student knows. He just had a bad day or he missed an assignment. We all have the days like that. So taking that in consideration as well. Also, late work. Do we penalize them and say, yep, zero, no grade for you because it had to be in today? Or do we say, okay, you're a few days late, you're going to lose a couple of points for being late, but I'll still grade it. Because yes, the world is like that. A lot of times if you're late, you get a grace period, you have a penalty, but you still get to turn it in, you're still accountable for it. When we look at late work, we have to say, is this chronic or is this occasional? And we respond differently depending on which one it is, and we deal with it accordingly. We can have two approaches. We can have an adjusted curriculum approach where we grade the student against his own progress, but we indicate that the grade reflects an adjusted curriculum for that student. Or we can grade them with progression and standards approach, where we grade the student with two grades, one indicating his performance with the standards and another showing his progression. So he may have got an A, B, or C in the class, but he got a 2, a 3, or a 1 based on his progression individually. We could also do multiple categories within each subject approach where the student gets a B in class, but it's divided and broken down, which it might look something like this. So this would be an English class. It shows all of the things that we taught so that you have a picture of where the student is and what things they're excelling in and which things they're lacking in, and you know where to progress from them. But if I just give them a B, I wouldn't know what skills they need to work on and where they're successful. So keeping that in mind. Here's an example of a grade card we might use for a newcomer. If you can answer always meets or sometimes meets in all of these, then the student would get that pass-fail grade. And this gives you an idea with a newcomer, you could use pass-fail grading if they enter as a newcomer with limited skills. So this kind of gives you a chart that you can use for that information. Again, when we're looking at our English learners, we have to take into account how much academic weight can they lift and where do they need support. Are they at a level 1 where they can only lift 5 pounds, or at a level 4 where they can lift 20 pounds? And how do we accommodate that? One way we can accommodate is by adapting the text and make it simpler structure, provide word banks, provide some notes or a guide, or concentrate on just the key concepts and eliminate the fluff. We could also alternate the measures use alternate measures to assess them, giving them more than one opportunity, giving different options of how we're going to assess them, either a test or an assignment or through a project. And it can look different for level 1, level 2 students than it does for students who are able to carry a heavier weight. So for reading, these are some things that we might have to put in place for our students. Maybe they need audio text or multiple readings or choral reading, or maybe they need translation or differentiation in their text. Summaries, maybe we summarize it for them and in simple language or provide them with dictionaries. In writing, maybe we provide sentence stems. In listening, we could use some of those Google or Microsoft extensions or YouTube videos or real hands-on items. And in speaking, again, we could use some of those extension tools like Google Voice Dictation or extended wait time. There are things we put in place that helps the level 1 and level 2 student. But then after they're no longer a newcomer or a lower level proficiency, we add some more skills and some higher expectations. Our classroom teachers need to be aware of these as well. Here's a sample of listening and speaking, things we could do at different levels in a math class. Okay, and then this would be something at a beginning, an intermediate, and advanced level for writing. This would be taking a lesson for a level 1 student where they were supposed to read about the causes of the American Civil War and how we could break it up with pictures and reduce text to help them understand the same concept, but in an easier format for them to have comprehensible input with. Here's a writing accommodation for a level 1 student. So on the left would be what higher level proficiency students would get, and on the right, a more simplified version, which has the same skill, it's showing the same expectation, but it's in a more accessible way, presented in a more accessible way for the student. Another way of scaffolding the information, more on scaffolding for beginning and developing English learners, and these are all available for you. And then these are some tools that with our new AI that you could use to help students. Some of them I provided links that you might be less familiar with, but these are some things that are out there that we can also use to help with our students gaining understanding that comprehensible input. Then these Google and Microsoft extensions that I talked about, I found some videos that talk to you a little bit on how you can use those with your students. When it comes to assessment, we have some options that we can use. We can provide the students the ability to give us a verbal response if they're not writing in English yet. We can let them respond also in their home language if we have someone that can translate that for us. Sometimes we may want to eliminate some of our multiple choice options and just give them fewer options. Give them the option to draw, diagram, label, graph, or match on the assessment. Provide some visual supports, those icons or pictures that will help them with the understanding. Providing word banks and sentence stems, chunk the text and the text of the test into smaller sections, give them extra time, and maybe if needed, give them this test in their home language. So these are all options. Again, if you're using this in instruction, you should use it in the assessment. So your instruction should match the way it's taught. We also want to teach some test-taking strategies to the students so that when we come to taking tests at the end of the year, by that time when we have our MAP, EOC, and access test, they have some skills under their belt that they can pull out. So one of the things that we did with students in the past was tell them to read the question first so they know what they're looking for when they read the passage. Or after they read the passage, cover the choices for the response and try to answer it themselves and get the response of what they think it might ask, and then look at the questions and see, that's the one I would have picked, and then they already kind of have a head start of looking about what the answer might be. You can have them use the highlighting tools on if it's an online test, to highlight keywords that help to build understanding. You can use that highlighting tool to cross out obviously wrong answers so they're not a distraction. And then using academic language every day with our students when we're discussing tests so that they understand the language of the test, and they're prepared when they see it on their assessments. One thing, generally speaking, when we're looking at assessment is that the percentage of English learners who receive failing grades should not exceed the percentage of students that are mainstream English only students receiving failing grades. So if all your other students are passing the test and it's just your English learners who are failing, there's something wrong with the process that you're using with your English learners, because they should not be the only ones failing your class or your assessments. Okay, when we come to our state assessments, because it's getting close to that time for all of these, make sure that you review your manuals and your guides on the EL and state assessment pages. And I've put those underlines or links to those manuals. Make sure you bookmark the Missouri guidance on assessment tools and accommodations for both MAP and EOC, because there are a lot of things available to our English learners. If you need them, secure your translators and interpreters ahead of time so you're not scurrying at the last minute trying to find someone. And you only need translators, interpreters in very few instances. If you're not, again, doing that all year long with your students, don't use translators and interpreters for your end of year assessments. So it needs to be something you're doing all year long. If they've heard instruction all year in English, it's not going to be as beneficial for them to have an interpreter or translator on the assessment. And then last thing here, utilize your DRC and WIDA AMS help desk, because they are very capable and they're quick to answer any questions you have, and they have lots of knowledge when it comes to things that can help your students. And use those practice tests and all of those ahead of time to get the students ready. One last thing, coming in July when Rob has his Elevate conference, they're bringing in Rick Wormelli, who has published a book, Fair Isn't Always Equal: Assessment and Grading in the Differentiated Classroom. It's a wonderful resource. And if you click on this link under the tab that says support materials, he has kind of a study guide that goes along with the book that you can use even if you don't have the book, to get some tips and ideas on working with any student, with English learners especially, but for any student, on how we can grade fairly and how we need to take all these things I mentioned today into consideration. So that is a really good resource. There's also this resource at the top that is a free website on perspective and practicality on assessment and grading issues. That's really pretty good. So I wanted to share that with you as well. Also, we have our male representatives that are there to help you, so contact them if you need some help with assessment. They're happy to come into your classroom and help you whenever you have a need, and they're free of charge. So give them a call or send them an email and ask for them to help. And of course, I'm always there as well. Then I'm going to end by asking if you have any questions, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera for those. So I want to thank you for being here today and for taking the time to watch the recording if you weren't here live. And as always, contact me or one of your male representatives anytime. That's why we're here. And thank you for being here today. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and end the recording.